The red and the black. According to literary historian, Stendhal inherited most of his ideas from the philosophes, or the ideologues. If this were true, this novelist, whom we consider so great, would not have a thought of his own. For his whole life, he would remain faithful to the thought of others. It is a hard legend to kill. It is popular both with those who would deny intelligence in the novel and with those who are trying to find a complete Stendhalian system and think they have found it in his early writing, that is, in the only more or less didactic texts ever written by Stendhal. Their thoughts dwell longingly on a huge key which would open all the gates of his work. A whole trousseau can be gathered effortlessly from the childish letters to Pauline, from the journal, and from his new philosophy. There is a loud rattle in the lock, but the gates remain closed. No page of the red and the black will ever be explained by means of Cabanis or Destoute de Tracy. Except for occasional borrowings from the system of temperaments, there is no trace of the theories of his youth in the novels of his maturity. Stendhal is one of the few thinkers of his time who won his independence from the giants of the preceding epoch. For this reason, he can render homage as an equal to the gods of his youth. Most of his romantic contemporaries are incapable of doing as much. They look on the rationalist pantheon with great condescension. But should it enter their head to reason, we find ourselves back in the century of the Enlightenment. Their opinions are different and even antithetical, but the intellectual frameworks have not changed. Stendhal does not give up thinking the day he stops copying the thought of others. He begins to think for himself. If the writer had never changed his opinion on the great political and social problems, why did he declare at the beginning of the life of Henry Brulard that he had at last decided on his point of view regarding the nobility? Nothing in the Stendhalian vision is more important than the nobility. Yet this definitive point of view is never systematically set down. The real Stendhal had an aversion to didacticism. His original thought is the novel and only the novel. For the moment Stendhal escapes from his characters, the ghost of the other begins to haunt him again. Therefore, everything has to be gathered from his novels. The non-novelistic texts sometimes contribute details, but they should be handled with care. Far from blindly trusting the past, Stendhal, even as early as De l'Amour, considers the problem of the error in Montesquieu and other great minds of the 18th century. The alleged disciple wonders why such keen observers as the philosophes should have been so completely wrong in their visions of the future. At the end of Memoirs of a Tourist, the theme of philosophical error is resumed and studied further. Stendhal finds nothing in Montesquieu to justify the condemnation of Louis Philippe. The bourgeois king gave the French greater liberty and prosperity than ever before. The progress is real, but it does not accord the people who benefit from it the increase of happiness foreseen by the theoreticians. Stendhal's own duty is indicated Stendhal's own duty is indicated to him by the mistakes of the philosophes. He must amend the conclusions of abstract intelligence by contact with experience. The intact Bastilles limited the vision of pre-revolutionary thinkers. The Bastilles have fallen and the world is changing at a dizzying pace. Stendhal finds he is straddling several universes. He is observing the constitutional monarchy, but he has not forgotten the Ancien regime. He has visited England, and he keeps up with the constant stream of books dealing with the United States. All the nations Stendhal is concerned with have embarked on the same adventure, but they are moving at different speeds. The novelist is living in a veritable laboratory of historical and sociological observation. His novels are, in a sense, merely this same laboratory carried to the second degree. In them, Stendhal brings together various elements which would remain isolated from each other even in the modern world. He confronts the provinces and Paris, aristocrats and bourgeois, France and Italy, and even the present and the past. Various experiences are carried out and they all have the same aim. They are all meant to answer the same fundamental question, quote, why are men not happy in the modern world? End of quote. This question is not original. Everybody, or almost everybody, was asking it in Stendhal's day. But few ask it sincerely, without having already decided a priori that one more or one less revolution is required. In his non-novelistic writings, Stendhal often seems to request both at the same time. But these secondary texts should not be allowed to worry us too much. Stendhal's real answer is blended into his novels, scattered through them. It is diffuse, full of hesitations and modifications. Stendhal is as prudent in the novels as he can be assertive when he is expressing his own, quote, personal, end of quote, opinion in the face of the opinion of others. Why are men not happy in the modern world? Stendhal's answer cannot be expressed in the language of political parties or of the various, quote, social sciences, end of quote. It is nonsense to both bourgeois common sense and romantic idealism. We are not happy, says Stendhal, because we are vaniteux. Morality and psychology are not the only sources of this answer. Stendhalian vanity has a historical component which is essential and which we must now clarify. In order to do this, we must first set forth Stendhal's idea of nobility, which, he tells us in the life of Henry Brulard, took a solid form rather late in his development. In Stendhal's eyes, nobility belongs to the man whose desires come from within himself and who exerts every ounce of his energy to satisfy them. Nobility, in the spiritual sense of the term, is therefore exactly synonymous with passion. The noble being rises above others by the strength of his desire. There must originally be nobility in the spiritual sense for there to be nobility in the social sense. At a certain point in history, both senses of the word noble coincided, at least theoretically. This coincidence is illustrated in the Italian chronicles. In 14th and 15th century Italy, the greatest passions were born and developed in the elite of society. This relative accord between the social organization and natural hierarchy of men cannot last. The nobleman's becoming aware of it is, in a sense, sufficient to precipitate its dissolution. A comparison is necessary to discover that one is superior to others. Comparison means bringing closer together, putting on the same level, and, to a certain extent, treating the things compared in the same way. The equality of man cannot be denied unless it is first posited, however briefly. The oscillation between pride and shame which defines metaphysical desire can already be found in this first comparison. The nobleman who makes the comparison becomes a little more noble in the social sense, but a little less noble in the spiritual sense. He begins the reflection that will gradually cut him off from his own nobility and transform it into a mere possession mediated by the look of a commoner. The nobleman, as an individual, is thus the passionate being par excellence. But nobility as a class is devoted to vanity. The more nobility is transformed into a caste and becomes hereditary, the more it closes its ranks to the passionate being who might rise from the lower classes, and the more serious the ontological sickness becomes. Henceforth, the nobility will be leading constantly toward vanity, the other classes dedicated to its imitation, and will precede them along the fatal road of metaphysical desire. Thus, the nobility is the first class to become decadent, and the history of this decadence is identical with the inevitable evolution of metaphysical desire. The nobility is already eaten up with vanity when it rushes to Versailles, drawn by the lure of vain rewards. Louis XIV is not the demigod worshipped by the royalists, nor is he the oriental tyrant loathed by the Jacobins. He is a clever politician who distrusts the aristocracy and uses its vanity as a means of government, thereby hastening the decomposition of the noble soul. The aristocracy lets itself be drawn into sterile rivalries by the monarchy, which reserves the right of arbitration. The Duc de Saint-Simon, perceptive but fascinated by the king, observes with quenchless rage this emasculation of the nobility. Saint-Simon, the historian of impotent hatred, is one of Stendhal's and Proust's great teachers. The absolute monarchy is one stage on the road to revolution and to the most modern forms of vanity. But it is only a stage. The vanity of the court presents a strong contrast with true nobility, but it makes an equally strong contrast with the vanity of the bourgeois. At Versailles, the slightest desires must be approved and permitted by a whim of the king. Existence at the court is a perpetual imitation of Louis XIV. The Sun King is the mediator for all who surround him, and this mediator remains separated from his faithful followers by an immense spiritual distance. The king cannot become the rival of his own subjects. M. de Montespan would suffer much more were his wife being unfaithful to him with an ordinary mortal. The theory of, quote, divine right, and of quote, provides a perfect definition of the particular type of external mediation which flourishes at Versailles and in the whole of France during the last 2 centuries of the monarchy. What was the state of mind of a courtier of the Ancien regime, or rather, what was Stendhal's impression of it? Several secondary characters in his novels and the brief works, several secondary characters in his novels and the brief but suggestive remarks scattered through some 20 works provide us with a fairly precise answer to that question. The pain caused by vanity exists in the 18th century, but it is not unbearable. It is still possible to enjoy oneself in the protective shade of the monarchy, somewhat like children at the feet of their parents. Indeed, a delicate pleasure is found in mocking the futile and rigorous rules of a perpetually idle existence. The great Lord has a perfect ease and grace by knowing that he is nearer the sun than other human beings, and thus a little less human than they, that he is illuminated by the divine rays. He always knows exactly what to say and what not to say, what to do and what not to do. He is not afraid of being ridiculed, and he gladly laughs in ridicule of others. Anything which is the slightest bit different from the latest fashion at court is ridiculous in his eyes. Thus, everything outside Versailles and Paris is ridiculous. It is impossible to imagine a more favorable setting for the growth of a comic theater than this universe of courtiers. Not a single illusion is lost on this public, which is not many, but one. Diderot would have been astonished to discover that laughter in the theater disappears with the tyrant. The revolution destroys only one thing. But that one thing is the most important of all, though it seems trivial to bear in mind. The divine right of kings. After the Restoration, Louis, Charles, and Philippe ascend the throne. They cling to it and descend from it more or less precipitously. Only fools pay any attention to these monotonous gymnastics. The monarchy no longer exists. Stendhal insists on this fact at some length in the last part of Lucien Leuwen. The ceremonies at Versailles cannot turn the head of a positive-minded banker. The real power is elsewhere. And this false king, Louis Philippe, plays the stock exchange, making himself the ultimate downfall, the rival of his own subjects. This last touch gives us the key to the situation. The courtier's external mediation is replaced by a system of internal mediation in which the pseudo-king himself takes part. The revolutionaries thought they would be destroying vanity when they destroyed the privileges of the noble. But vanity is like a virulent cancer that spreads in a more serious form throughout the body just when one thinks it has been removed. Who is there left to imitate after the tyrant? Henceforth men shall copy each other. Idolatry of one person is replaced by hatred of 100,000 rivals. In Balzac's opinion, too, there is no other God but envy for the modern crowd, whose greed is no longer stemmed and held within acceptable limits by the monarch. Men will become gods for each other. Young men of the nobility and of the middle class come to Paris to seek their fortune as courtiers once came to Versailles. They crowd into the garrets of the Latin Quarter as once they used to pile into the attics of Versailles. Democracy is one vast middle-class court where the courtiers are everywhere and the king is nowhere. Balzac, whose observations in all these matters frequently corroborate Stendhal's, has also described this phenomenon. Quote, "In the monarchy, you have either courtiers or servants, whereas under a charter you are served, flattered, and fawned on by free men," end of quote. When speaking of the United States, Tocqueville too mentions the esprit de corps which reigns in the democracies. The sociologist's reflection throws a vivid light on the transition from external to internal mediation. Quote, "When all the privileges of birth and fortune have been destroyed so that all professions are open to everyone and it is possible to climb to the top by oneself, An immense and easy career seems available to men's ambitions, and they gladly imagine a great destiny for themselves. But they are mistaken, as daily experience proves to them. The very equality which enables each citizen to sustain great hopes makes all citizens equally weak. It limits their strength on all sides at the same time as it allows their desires to spread. They have destroyed the annoying privileges of some of their fellow men. They encounter the competition of everyone. The boundary has changed its shape rather than its position. The constant opposition on the one hand of instincts which give birth to equality on the other, and on the other of the means provided to satisfy them, torments and tires souls. However democratic the social state and political constitution of a nation may be, yet inevitably each of its citizens will behold around him several aspects which dominate him, and it can be anticipated that he will obstinately fix his eyes in this one direction. We find in Stendhal this uneasiness which Tocqueville attributes to democratic regimes. The vanity of the Ancien regime was gay, unconcerned, and frivolous. The vanity of the 19th century is sad and suspicious. It has a terrible fear of ridicule. Quote, envy, jealousy, and impotent hatred, end of quote, are the accompaniment of internal mediation. Stendhal declares that everything has changed in a country when even fools, always the most stable element, have changed. The fool of 1780 wanted to be witty. To make people laugh was his only ambition. The fool of 1825 wants to be serious and formal. He is set on appearing profound and easily succeeds, the novelist adds, because he is truly unhappy. Stendhal never tires of describing the effects of la vanité triste on the customs and psychology of the French. The aristocrats are most hard hit. Quote, when one stops considering the serious results of the revolution, one of the first sights that strikes one's imagination is the present state of French society. I spent my youth among great lords who were very pleasant. Today they are old, disagreeable reactionaries. At first I thought their peevish humor was an unfortunate effect of age. So I made the acquaintance of their children, who will inherit great wealth and noble titles. In fact, most of the privileges that men drawn together in society can confer on some among them. I found them sunk even deeper in despondency than their parents. End of quote.